Nope. It usually goes away.
Yesterday, Dominic was telling us at lunch that he said that the Great Gatsby is hard to write about. Oh yeah, why would it be hard to write about?
It's easy to read. There's nothing. I don't think any of the books are gonna comprehension being tough. I think Great Gatsby, when it comes to one of the things that you have to do early on is rhetorical analysis. It's not going to be a big, long, lengthy essay. It'll be way shorter than we did for the Great Draft. A lot of people find it to be almost too literal. So, the metaphors, the symbolism, the imagery, it's still there. I mean, it certainly can be done. By no means is it impossible. But it doesn't have as much of that symbolic stuff that I think aligns with the rhetorical analysis as well. But it's not a big, long, lengthy essay. So it's still very doable. Knowing that we're going to talk about the structure of the essay, we're definitely going to hit on that here today. Is there anything from yesterday that we did not hit on that you still have questions about so far as what the prompt's asking me to do? What are basic requirements that I have to have in there? And if you just want to turn the light off, you can do that. Kayla will be very excited.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I mean, I kind of like the.
I was getting lightheaded.
Yo, Avery's an ominous.
That he should not come to
What did you
homecoming.
say right now?
I said it's an
I mean, if you
ominous
can't handle
effect.
that, homecoming.
It's dark.
Like some kind of.
No, but not like.
Well, I'm gonna be standing there with my flashlight, just like looking at it.
That's like not supposed to be happening. So like,
Mr. King,
And my GoPro on my head.
Mr. King, can you DJ this year?
No.
Oh.
So outside of structure, anything else with this that folks walked out going, oh, I wish I had asked a question about it or anything along those lines? We're going to do awkward silence for about 14 seconds. Or 5. That was long enough. That invisible ink is working again. Hey, it's there. It says it. You can so that you then have the back of your paper for like your own kind of notes. Either way would work for works for me. 1808.
So this is like notes.
This is making sure you do it correctly. Duncan, what's your first paragraph going to be? You're like first period. It was a pretty, I thought I was given a gimme. We sure?
It's gonna be what?
There you go. And we touched base with this yesterday. Introduction, you're certainly going to have your thesis statement, although this one will be a little bit different because you'll probably be going with like a compound thesis statement. Remember, should you go with a compound thesis, what word do you want to make sure you kind of think about that'll go in between those two sentences? Have a pretty good transition. So it could be a conjunction.
I said it right yesterday. I got the answer right yesterday.
You could have so or but yet, that would certainly be fine. But make sure there's some kind of transition that's going to link those things together. That's probably especially important if you are not going to justify his behavior. So you might do something along the lines of, despite the fact that Holden's behavior cannot be justified, it still plays a very important part in the argument that Salinger's trying to get across with it.
Is it possible? I think it's possible to make one thesis statement and have it still sound okay.
Sure, it is. I mean, I think the one that I did would for the most part work, where I started off with despite. Yeah. So if you could, and we're going to get grammatical here, if you could write a complex sentence where you start off with you wouldn't have to, but you could start off with a dependent clause and then finish it up with an independent clause, and it would be okay. For some folks, if the thesis statement gets to be lengthy, and I don't mean too long in the sense that it's grammatically incorrect or I'm going to go that's a bad sentence, but for some folks, if you end up having a lengthier thesis statement, I think you sometimes lose track of what it is that you're saying or promising that you're going to deliver on. And if that's a situation that you might be in, then I'd split it up into two. But by no means is a compound thesis going to be a requirement for what you do for your introduction. I just think it'll probably be a way that a lot of folks work for it. But yeah, you could have something along the lines of, as I just said, despite the fact that Holden's behaviors cannot be justified, they still play an important part in Salinger's argument or purpose that, fill in the blank, that would be certainly okay as a thesis. Because I know whether or not you are going to justify the behaviors. So you'll decide, can you justify, you could defend, you could refute, you could qualify, and you would also want to make sure that you identify what Salinger's purpose is. What is the purpose? What is the significance that he is trying to get across? If your thesis or if your introduction makes reference to Salinger's purpose and you leave it at that, I'll certainly probably put a note in there, well, what is his purpose? Can you specify it? Because what that would create, if you specify it right off the top, it's making your argument much more focused, which is like a key word, a key term that those AP readers are looking at. So the more specific and focused you can be from the get-go and follow that the whole way through, it's adding more credibility to your argument. Your thesis could say Salinger's purpose, and I go, what is the purpose? And then you do prove what it is, you do explain what it is later in the essay, but it comes off a lot better, a lot cleaner, more sophisticated than if you consistently refer to what that purpose, that significance is going to be. And again, we mentioned yesterday the soapstone. That would be something where you could kind of look at that soapstone, think about the different arguments, the different audiences that could be writing about, and that would give you some ideas as to what Salinger's trying to get across. Anyone want to take a guess on the last purpose that I want to see you write about? Well, it's not even worrying about like the word, but yeah, putting show would not be my favorite. But every now and then, well, not every now and then, every year, there's at least a couple people that, despite his behaviors not being justifiable, or even though they are justifiable, they still contribute to Salinger's objective of making the book
better
or more interesting, more fun to read, which is pretty much a total cop-out response. I mean, yeah, it certainly does probably help with the everyday value, but we're looking at you trying to go a little bit deeper with that. So whatever you do, don't go, it makes the book more interesting.
Well, I have to do it because you said that.
1942 you could overcome. I don't know if you would be able to overcome that one.
Alright,
That's going to be pretty weak, kind of thing. Well, and in all seriousness, like if your whole essay, you justify or explain why the behavior is not appropriate, but you don't touch on the significance, you can't get a 5 because you haven't answered the prompt completely. You've only done half of it. Conversely, if you explain about how the behaviors are significant to his overall purpose, but you never decide that they're justifiable or not justifiable, same thing. You're stuck like in 4+ land. So you have to make sure that you do both of them. If you were to do, in all seriousness, that it makes the book more interesting, maybe you can swing a 5-, but I doubt it. That's not my ringtone, it's the iPad. I always back out.
So you use an iPad when you use your phone.
No, but I think because they're on Wi-Fi together, you can
Watch it.
the whole world comes tumbling down. So make sure you do both of those things within the introduction, that you do identify, about the behavior, you come up with the purpose, and then make sure you do specify what it is. Body paragraphs. What are you going to do?
2 or 3.
What's going to be in them?
Some information.
What are you thinking? Savannah's thinking. No, I saw that hand go up. That's probably what you meant.
Well, like, if you did 2 paragraphs, wouldn't one be about one of the questions and one about the other question?
One about the behavior and one about the purpose.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you do, and we're going to come up with a couple options here. Yay, smartboard. I would want at least 2 body paragraphs devoted to behavior, for the simple fact that it allows for a more credible argument, where I'm not just looking at like one incident that happened, but I'm getting more of word went away, but a more consistent, at least argument approach, because I got multiple examples to back it up. The hope would be, and I certainly think it's very doable, is that for those behaviors, I'd have like 2 examples for each paragraph. So that's going to give me that grand total of 4. Now, they're in separate paragraphs, so what can I still do with my examples?
Qualify.
Yeah, you could. But we'll get to that part here in a second. How would I want to decide which examples are going to go in which of my 2 body paragraphs? Like, I'm going to have specific examples, but I can still come up with like an overarching like type of behavior. So like, what is a type of behavior? And I don't care if you're going to defend it or refute it. What's a type of behavior that Holden does that tends to be maddening? I don't need a specific example, just a type of behavior. Okay, violent behavior.
Physical.
What do you mean by physical? Just like, is that different from violent or?
No.
Okay, so you're like physically attacking or?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so, and not obviously that you gotta go with these 2, but body paragraph number 1, you said violent?
Yeah.
Right. So could be violent actions, could be violent thoughts. When Adele, mental, like just mentally unsound, mentally unstable.
Like some of the things he like
Okay.
or it could be like speaking too, because like I don't know in the actual book, because he's like speaking to the reader, if that would count as like his thoughts or if it would count as
I go more as thoughts. I mean, because like technically, yes, he would be speaking to the therapist or psychologist or whatnot, but I would say like the dialogue, him speaking as what he says to Sally, what he says to Stradlett, or what he says to other folks. So okay, well, I'm gonna have mental thoughts. With the understanding that if I went with these 2 things, my mental thoughts could not also cross over like into violent tendencies. So like mental thoughts about plugging Maurice, I'd really be kind of double dipping, and I would want to have separate things. So I have violent actions, I have mental thoughts. Now for my 2 examples, this is where I start to get specific. So I'm going to take violent actions, come up with 2 examples of those. Take a look at some of his mental thoughts. Might be conversation that he has with Allie, could be an example, or just other stuff that's going on in his head, and come up with 2 examples of those. So in total I got 4, but they're not just like 4 random ideas. I'm coming up with a specific type of behavior, and now I'm coming up with, what those examples would be. Mitchell, you said about qualifying. I think most of us will probably stick to, I can justify the behaviors or I can't. But theoretically, you could go, maybe it would be switched where his mental thoughts are understandable based on context, but he goes too far with some of his violent actions. So you could qualify in that way if you wanted to. How could I still write the whole essay and keep it in 2 body paragraphs? So I'm going to take a look at his behavior and apply how that is significant Yeah, I just can't. I'm just going to write 1942 and we'll know I made a mistake. You didn't tell Chandler about it.
Oh, what?
1942. I said, do you know about Gray's essay? He said, no.
Oh, that's because, like, I think he was annoying me that day, so I don't want to talk to him.
That's what brothers are for.
Well, I'm not gonna tell him, hey, Chandler, I'm really annoyed at you, but by the way, I wrote 1942 instead of 1492 on my essay. Because usually when I say stuff like that, he just says, I don't care, and proceeds to do what he's doing.
You guys should wrestle with him.
No, last time that happened, great peace.
You wanna wrestle
Actually,
with
it chokes me, that's different.
Now I can spell significant. So I could do that here, and then I could do the exact same thing again in the other paragraph. And I have 2 body paragraphs now.
If you did that, would you have to do it for like each specific one, or just like the overall violent action?
By each specific one, you mean like the
Like
2 examples
like,
that we're
would you have to
talking
do that
about?
For, like, each example, or like could you do it like the end and like
End of the paragraph?
Yeah.
I would probably do it at the end of the end of the paragraph. So I write about my 2 violent actions, and then after those 2 violent actions, I could address them kind of together, like
Yeah.
these actions or both of these help with identifying, Salinger's overall purpose. You could do it this method. Originally, you said 2 body paragraphs, one about his behavior, one about the significance.
Yeah.
We could still go that route, but it would be 2 about his behavior and now 1 about the significance. That would be fine too. I don't have a personal preference as to how you go about it, and honestly, from the length of the essay, they would probably be pretty much the same. You'll have 2 longer paragraphs if you do it this way. If you went with a 3 body paragraph, they'd be shorter. That doesn't mean they're too small, but you're still going to be covering the same amount of content. Reasons to not do it this way. And I'm not thinking of any of you specifically. Sometimes when people then go to write the significance and they tack it on at the end of the essay, they might not give it its full time to develop. If I just write, and this is important to the significance because in 1 sentence, and that's it, you're probably not addressing it enough. Common thing that mentioned with your Grapes of Wrath essays, if you were doing like a 1-sentence analysis after each quote, if you did a 1-sentence explanation of the significance at the end of the paragraph, it's probably not doing what you want it to. If you develop a whole body paragraph about the significance, there's a better chance that, hey, I had 2 pretty long paragraphs up here, my 3rd body paragraph significance, you look at it spatially, they should be about the same length. It probably would have more development to it. Can anyone think of a problem of doing a significance paragraph separate from these 2? Time. Yeah, I mean, and that could be an honest issue. It could be a mental block. Where some of you are going, I can do 2 body paragraphs. There's no way I can do 3 body paragraphs, and you can kind of suck yourself out beforehand.
You'd have to reference the things you already established.
So
You'd kind of be repeating yourself.
and that's a concern that people, I think, have with a lot of essays. Like, even at the end of paragraphs, when you do rhetorical analysis, like reinforcing the argument, as long as you are reinforcing it and explaining how it continues, you extend the argument, you're fine. But yeah, I think like with the time, there can be a little mental thing of, I'm just summarizing what's happened. Everson?
You would have to relate its purpose to both of the behavior paragraphs, and if the purpose is different between them, then that.
And that's all going to depend upon your examples that you go with. So if the violent actions, and again, these are samples, not ones you have to take with, but your point is, if both of these things align to one unified purpose, not a problem to do a separate paragraph. If the purposes of these 2 things you feel are slightly different, this gives you the flexibility to kind of have a couple purposes or significance that you're looking at. It might, the cohesiveness, the continuity could be a little bit better than if you're going with that 3rd separate one. So I think it would, as you're planning stuff out, it'll probably be a decision, what are the behaviors, what are the examples of those behaviors, all right, how do those align with the purpose? If you have one big purpose that they all go with, 3rd body paragraph makes sense. If you think those purposes aren't going to be the same, then probably the two body paragraph ends up making a little bit more sense. If you think there are two separate purposes, you can certainly address them. That's not a problem. It's not bad if they're two different things. But it doesn't work very well if you're trying to explain all of those things in one paragraph. Does that make sense so far? So I don't care if you do 2, if you do 3, 4, 5, whatever. You just want to make sure you check off, those objectives as that you need to cover with it.
So we need specific examples, but we don't need quotes, right?
Right. So, if you talk about violent action when after the altercation with Maurice and he calls him a dirty moron and he gets pummeled, when he's trying to recuperate, he mentally starts to fantasize about plugging Maurice and Jane's going to be at his side as he goes down in his trench coat and plugs him with the machine gun. You've given me a specific reference. I'm fine with that. You don't have to quote it. You don't have to quote anything there. If he is mentally unstable throughout the course of the book, and he's always talking about ducks, you're not getting very detailed with it yet at that point. So you can certainly be specific without quoting. I don't think there's any example that you don't absolutely have to quote. The one thing I would say is you have your book. On the weekend, you're coming up with your examples. All kidding aside, 1942 and all that stuff. With the essay that you were doing with Artifice, you weren't getting graded or assessed in any way of your understanding of the book. It would be a bigger deal to go, Sally likes to keep her kings all in the back row of the checkerboard, than it would be writing about 1942. Because now you're mixing up characters, and so your argument could still make sense, but if you're flipping Jane and Sally, or Phoebe, you're kind of forgetting about what was her name, his little sister Phyllis. You got to know that stuff because you got the book that you can kind of plan it out. If one person writes about how Holden is possibly traumatized by a former classmate jumping out of the window that's wearing his clothing, and then the other person talks about James Castle has on his white turtleneck and Angelini puts the coat over him to carry him away, that second person is going to probably get rewarded for more because they got more detail than what that first person did. So just make sure that you don't have to have the quotes, but the more specific you are, the better off you're going to be. Where folks separate themselves is the specificity of the examples and the clarity of the purpose. Those are probably the two main things. And when you talk about, and I know we said this yesterday, but when you talk about the purpose, you have to make sure Salinger gets mentioned with it. Bring him in. And when you go to justify the behaviors, you're probably going to bring in more examples anyway. Because if you're justifying it, you'll probably talk about Al, you'll talk about details and things from his life. And if you're not justifying it, you'll still talk about details from his life. Those wouldn't count as your 4 examples, but that'll still be a way that you can build up the specific nature that you want for the essay. You didn't hear her. Yeah, she's in that in and out. It means we got to put the light back on, so it's flicking. And then Kayla's going to get upset. You're going to have 2 people mad at you.
I'm not mad.
Yeah, but I'm, What were you going to say?
Oh yeah. Does Holden running away, the decision to run away? Yeah, run away in a sense to just keep moving about during those 2 or 3 days. Is that called eccentric behavior? The way that he kind of just he's well, I guess I could just go to the park and just lay there for the night.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, you could write about him. You could do a couple things. I mean, you could say him literally running away, where he still means to go home, but he doesn't. And then he talks enough times about, well, I could go live here, or I could go live here. So the thought process is there. At the very least, you could talk about his inability to face his problems. Why doesn't he want to go home? I don't want to talk to mom and dad. I don't want them to know I got kicked out again and all that stuff. So, and certainly we do things like that where, okay, we don't want to face our problems, but, if you forget to bring in your homework assignment, that doesn't mean you're not going to be here for the work of school. You're still going to come in and deal with it, face the music, so to speak. So, yeah, I would say that kind of this eccentric behavior on multiple levels.
So I the way I interpret the
which is fine.
and just talk about like generally like the whole thing.
As long which as we said would be fine, so long as those examples like help kind of funnel into that madness. So like I don't think the essay would flow well if we were, all right, here are his violent actions, here are his mental thoughts. Now, so the fact that he calls everyone phonies is maddening. You know, in that third paragraph, it'd be like a whole new element would come in. But you doing the third body paragraph with madness as a whole, as long as it's encapsulating those things, you should be fine. And a way I would kind of think about, I don't know if this is going in the direction you wanted it to, but if Holden were normal, quotation mark, or if Holden's not even in the book, you know, you substitute some other character in, does Salinger's argument still work? The assumption would be no, why not? That's what you would kind of be explaining in that significance, whether it's a separate body paragraph or whether it's getting added onto those other two. What is it about his maddening behavior that makes the book work so far as to whatever it is that Salinger wants to kind of get across? That's the main thing that we're looking at. That help at all?
Yeah.
That usually means we made it worse.
No.
Rebecca, maybe this is when I ruined the book. Could be. Could be.
Not really.
Okay. Keep trying. Geo Duncan's the only person that didn't put his last name on the line. It's like, Duncan.
Boy, Gun can't. Dude, I make that joke every year. Come on, Greg. Greg, that's like the
I
Greg
think it was
joke.
like because of one
That's
arm
like
at
the
the
Greg
time,
joke.
but it was
Okay.
just, you don't want to
Maybe it
keep
was
typing.
that.
You're
I'll
like,
remember Duncan. I'll go with that.
Dude, I don't really care.
Isn't that what Dunkin' Donuts changed their name to? Is it Dunkin'? Yeah, they just changed it to Dunkin'.
You know what's really odd?
What?
Numbers that you can't divide by.
Dude, they're joggers. I don't know what you expect.
Prime.
Dude, good. Maybe you deserve it. In fact, you did.
I thought it was funny. No, it was actually
Anything else?
I didn't feel like you had to explain so much. I
thought it was really great.
Yeah, and I was like, this is like odd. I was
It's all about time.
yeah.
It's all about time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, good.
So two body paragraph, three body paragraph, I don't care. Talking about time, you know, like do I have time for three body paragraphs? The most important paragraphs in the essay are the body paragraphs. Assuming time is there, the hope would be that you still have a conclusion. Like let's say you do go body paragraph 1, behavior, body paragraph 2, behavior, body paragraph 3, significance. The hope would be you'd still be able to do a conclusion so you can reinforce whether or not that behavior was maddening and the fact that it contributes to the meaning of the work as a whole. So do still aim for having a conclusion. Don't hope that last body paragraph kind of takes care of it. But, you know, if it's, do I finish this paragraph or do I write a conclusion, I'm finishing this paragraph. And if your conclusion ends up being 2 sentences because I had to finish working on something else so far as body paragraph, so be it. You're going to get more out of those sentences being in the body paragraph than you probably would have been in the conclusion. So prompt you can bring in, you can have, you know, your ideas outlined. If you go with quotes, I put some page numbers so you can cite them, but you can certainly have specific details without it having to be quoted directly you know, from the book. You have your books with you? No. What were you going to say, or was it just like I don't know, the lips moved and me or her?
Dude, I bet he's angry at you. That's why he's passive
We
hostility
got the
every
north
day.
face, we could go with the hostile face, the angry face, that's part of it. Look, that could be a graphics project.
I'm not.
Senior year is always an option.
That's the plan.
Duncan, you're just gonna take that from Santa.